And today we discuss the aurora and the night sky on Behind the Shot. Hi, once again, welcome to Behind the Shot, the show where we try and get inside the mind of great photographers by taking a closer look behind one of their shots, from conception to completion and all the stories and challenges that happen in between. I'm Steve Brazill. I've got a great guest lined up for you today, and I want to remind you that with any episode, you can go check out the show notes, a full blog post, and a gallery of the guests' images so that you get a better idea of what they do. And for that matter, all the links to all of their information. You can find that at behindtheshot.tv. And of course, if you are a podcast listener, this podcast is available in multiple forms. Wherever you get your podcasts, whatever podcast app you use, you can get it in audio form. If your podcast app supports video, there is a separate feed for the video of Behind the Shot. And of course, the video also available up on our YouTube channel. Before I bring my guest in today, there is one thing I want to remind you of. At the time that we are recording this, which is late November 2019, Don Komarechka and I have done our first Behind the Shot critique show. That show is available on the Behind the Shot YouTube channel, where Don and I sit down. If you don't know Don, by the way, he does the Photo Geek Weekly podcast, one of my favorite podcasts to listen to, and periodically I'm honored to be a guest on that show. He discusses 4 very geeky, very techie, photography-related topics each show. And Don and I sit down for these shows, and we critique people's images. If you want to participate, it's not hard to do. There is a Behind the Shot group on Flickr. So if you go sign up for a Flickr account, free account or pro account, doesn't matter, join the group for Behind the Shot and submit your images to the group. We're all having fun over there and seeing a lot of great work, actually. But as an extra bonus, if you tag your image with BTS critique, all one word, and it's not a hashtag in the comment or caption, Flickr has their own tagging system. So just put BTS critique as a Flickr tag. We use those images that are both in the group and tagged to pull for future critique shows, and we are going to try and do one at least once a month and possibly even more often than that. And that brings us to today's guest. Now, today's guest, I met for the first time, I think it was in August in Las Vegas at Photoshop World Las Vegas for 2019. And as soon as I met Dave, I knew we were going to be friends. Dave Williams, how are you?
Hey, good evening here. Anyway, yeah, I'm good, thanks. How are you doing, Rez?
I'm very, very good. And yes, it is evening for you. So 2 things I got to thank you for. Number one, for staying up so late this time. And number 2,
there's always something to do.
Number 2 is this is our second try at this show.
Yeah.
So your patience.
I apologize.
No, it's not your fault at all, man. Your patience has been so much appreciated. We recorded this show once already, and just due to the internet wanting to be the internet and a bunch of technical things, we had so much lag that we've decided to do the show again. And so I appreciate Dave, you being such a good sport and doing this again. I want to talk about you.
It's great to be back.
Yeah, and it's good to see you face to face again. So I mentioned that we met at Photoshop World.
Yeah.
The meeting at Photoshop World was this really weird happenstance where I was standing there interviewing people, and I'm not going to lie, I thought that I was just interviewing, people that were attending Photoshop World, right? Paying customers to Photoshop World. And you were walking by with Sean Elizabeth, which, by the way, if you don't know Sean Elizabeth, you need to go look up Sean Elizabeth.
You need to know Sean Elizabeth.
Right?
Exactly. She's got the most awesome, I don't know, being a travel photographer, I'm not very good at all the stuff where you get people involved, but to me, it's like really cool fashion portraits, really nice lighting. And yeah, she's a really good photographer. Check her out, Sean Elizabeth.
Yeah. And by the way, give the spelling for Sean, because it's the Welsh spelling. It's not how we spell Sean here in America.
No, it's S-I-A-N.
Okay. So Sean Elizabeth.
S-I-A-N Elizabeth. And if you look that up on Instagram or Facebook, you'll find her. Or if you look at me, you'll find her somewhere tagged.
Yeah, and that's actually a good way to do it, is just go look at the people that Dave is following on Instagram, and we'll give out his Instagram stuff on screen and verbally so that you can get that. Because this is going to be a show about Sean Elizabeth now. But seriously, she has a really unique vision in the type of photography that she does. So you guys were walking down the hallway, and I'm thinking, oh, here's 2 attendees to Photoshop World. Guys, can I do an interview? Mid-interview, I looked at Dave's badge, and said Dave Williams, Photoshop World instructor, and I went, you're Dave Williams. I know you. We've just never met before. But that interview was really enlightening to me, because when I said to you guys, what are you looking forward to at Photoshop World? And a Photoshop World instructor said to me, I want to learn more about
video.
And
here I am trying to figure out how this works.
And I think you also mentioned InDesign during the conversation too.
Yeah. I mean, I've got a book out now under my belt, and I still have no idea how InDesign works. I need to learn InDesign so bad. I really do.
And InDesign is not one most people just pick up and run with really quickly.
No.
But that told me that Microsoft even the instructors at Photoshop World, they show up at Photoshop World because they're hungry to learn too. So let's cover you a little bit. You're a Kelby 1 instructor. You have classes on Kelby 1.
Yeah.
So if you're a Kelby 1 member, go Google it. But I think I have a link in the blog post for your classes too. And you're a Photoshop World instructor, but you're a travel photographer based out of London. And I say out of London because in the time that I've known you, you've been home like 3 days.
Yeah, sounds about right. I just got back from, where did I just get back from? Canada. And in a couple of days' time, 4 days' time from now, time of interview, I'll be in Norway and Finland, or specifically Lofoten and Lapland. So yeah, it's cool.
You being a travel photographer, you shoot something that I truly, honestly, I don't do well at all. I mean, I really honestly just suck at landscape and nature photography.
Oh, really?
So what you do to me is just fascinating. You're a photographer. You're clearly an educator. You're a blogger. You're an author. And I want to touch on your book because I've only had one. Today we're going to talk about the aurora in the night sky. And I've only had one aurora shot on before from a guy by the name of Ken Skloot, a very well-known photographer. But you literally wrote the book. The Complete Aurora Guide for Travel Photographers. Tell me about the book.
For travelers and photographers. Yeah. So the book's broken down into 4 sections. And the 4th chapter is the photographer-centric section. So that's the bit where you're going to learn how to shoot the aurora and what to expect, what you need to deal with, how you need to set up. But the previous 3 chapters are all about the aurora themselves. That's why it's for travelers and photographers. Section 1 is all the stories, the folklore and the old, the stories from Lapland and Inuit stories and Eskimo stories and Native American stories and all these stories from all over the world about what they thought the aurora was, why there were lights in the sky in the dark of winter, and what they put it down to, be it the tail of the Arctic fox whipping across the sky in Finland, or the souls of their ancestors from northern Canada, or even a walrus skull being used for a football in Greenland. There are so many different versions of what the Aurora Borealis actually is. But then section 2 breaks it down to the science. What we now know what the Northern Lights are. And because we now know what they are, and that's fully explained in section 2, section 3 goes on to explain, now we know what they are, how do we find and predict them? How do we know where they're going to appear in the night sky and when? And there is a combination of an art and a science to it. So as long as you've got the right conditions, a little bit of luck comes into play there, whether you've got the clouds and the darkness that you need, or the cloud-free sky and the darkness that you need. The science of the aurora itself, what's happening up in space, that's all explained in there as well. So yeah, it's literally the complete guide to the aurora.
And the book is available on Amazon, and in the blog post at behindtheshot.tv, I will have a link for that book so that people can find it.
People are going to love it.
Yeah. And you mentioned, when we get into the shot, I want to touch on that science bit, because when we did the first take, right, we got into the northern lights versus the southern lights and the different, what makes it. And you gave kind of this brief synopsis of what causes the aurora. So when we get into the shot, I want to make sure I remember to revisit that, because it was one of my favorite parts watching back the first attempt at this interview. Cool. You have a client list that is interesting to me, because most people tend to have a client list that is, I'm looking for the words here, kind of in a certain genre. right? They're travel
Right.
magazines or whatever.
Yeah.
You have a client list that goes from Time Magazine and Nat Geo and Lonely Planet to Forbes, Boeing, Huawei, and Microsoft, and
Yeah.
Shell and Triumph.
Yeah. Yeah.
For
Through
what
to
you do,
like
isn't that kind of an interesting mix of clients?
Absolutely, I love it. It's great. It's great to see where these things go and what's done with them, and it ranges from that all the way through to like small Japanese tourist companies marketing their trip to Lapland or their trip to Iceland, and use for just press pieces in websites and magazines, and it's this range of customers is huge. But that's part of what travel photography is to me. It's a very hard genre to be in, because travel photography isn't really a genre. It's a collection of genres. It's landscapes and portraits and cityscapes and dark skies and food. It's all of that put in together. The thing that binds it as travel photography to me is the fact that a good travel photo should make the person that's looking at it want to be there, and that's what makes it successful for Nat Geo and travel magazines and various other things. So because of that, and because it's such a broad genre containing genres, it needs to reflect that in how it runs as a business. And so there are multiple streams of income, from stock to editorial to blogging to literally every stream of income, if down to Instagram influencing. Would you believe I'm an Instagram influencer? This guy?
I would believe it because I know your work, but
there are so many streams of income that come together to make the bigger picture.
That's
what
actually
travel photography really is.
That's actually fascinating to me, because that's the best way I think I've ever heard. Actually, so much to unpack in that. One, it's the best way I think I've ever heard travel photography discussed or described. Right. Travel photography is not a genre in and of itself. Travel photography is environmental portraiture. It's waterscapes, it's landscapes, it's cityscapes, it's documentation, it's editorial, it's photojournalism. It's all these, many of which are genres we already know.
Yeah. But it all has that one thing in common. It's that it's the element of making the person looking at the picture want to be there.
Which your Triumph shot that you posted right after Photoshop World, you did a Route 66 thing, and you took a picture of two Triumph motorcycles in front of the Milky Way that made me want to be there.
I think everyone wants to be there. That's why I went.
Well, and then there's that.
So, so me and Mark Heaps, another Photoshop World instructor, who's also just taught at Adobe Max and just finished there. He and I went to Seligman, Arizona, as our base for a few days while we rode Triumph Tigers up and down Route 66, taking awesome pictures and looking at cool things. And went to a town called Oatman, Arizona. Have you ever heard of it?
I know it well, actually. Yeah,
full of donkeys. So weird. Anyway, we pulled off the main highway onto Route 66, and it suddenly just got so dark, and we stopped in this like dusty pullout on the side of the road as soon as we hit Route 66, and saw that Milky Way. The core was just a bit too low, but the Milky Way was there, the road was there, and then the highway was passing through the back of that picture. So you've got the lights of the trucks passing by, which kind of defines a horizon in a moonless sky, with the two bikes facing each like that, facing in the foreground, lit with a Lytra, which was set to something ridiculously low and pointed at the sky just so the light spilled onto them. And for 25 seconds, in came the light from the Milky Way, and boom. There's the picture.
It really is the perfect commercial marketing shot for a brand like
Triumph. And they haven't bought it. Can you believe that? They haven't bought it.
Are you serious?
I'm serious.
Oh, yeah, they should. But also, to unpack in that comment that you made was the multiple revenue streams. So there's a business lesson in that, yes, there are genres in photography that are difficult to monetize.
Yeah.
But they're not impossible to monetize if you look at a wider use model of the shots.
Exactly. So to me, I've done lots of different things in photography, and to me, I'm going to say easiest, but I use the term to describe the money rather than the art and the skill. The easiest is weddings and kids, because those are the photos that people know I have to pay a fair chunk for this, but I'm going to get that photo as a memory of my child or as a memory of my wedding forever and ever, and there it is. And so people know they've got to pay for that. So there's quite a simple stream of income there. When you move away from that model, when you're moving away from the memory shots of family and friends and pets and kids and weddings, then you have to think outside the box as to what your income stream really is and what it's made up of and how to build it, monetize it, market it, and really make it a business.
Yeah, I completely agree. But you've done well at it. And you've turned that into the Kelby One instructor. You've turned it into the Kelby One classes. You've been on the grid. You've got tutorials up at Tip Squirrel. So a lot of different things. So let's get into some questions about you and the photographic end. What's your go-to camera body and lens? Desert Island thing. You can only have one.
It's right. It's here somewhere. Of what I own, it's right. So I was shooting a D810 for years, and I recently got a Nikon Z6, sorry, American.
Z6 works for everywhere but here.
If I was to pick between the two at the moment, I'd stick with the D810 because I know my way around it without looking at anything.
What about lens?
You can. Okay, so I carry around with me the Holy Trinity, the 14 to 24, 24 to 70, 70 to 200, all in f2.8. And if I've got them all on me, I'm usually quite inclined to pull out the 14 to 24. But if I had to just choose one forever and ever and ever and ever, it would be the 70 to 200. Okay. Because of how it forces you to compose properly rather than just flooding a scene like the 14 can, where you're going to end up with a good composition in most cases because you've got such a big scene to work from. With the 70 to 200, you have to work that little bit harder to create the scene and create the composition. And you can use the depth and the compression of the lens to help you do that as well. Your 70 to 200, Nikon D810, there's your answer. Boom.
Okay, that works. And what apps do you use that you can't live without? Because that's the big thing now is everybody has an app that they've got to have. What's your go-to app?
Instagram.
I mean, like app for for you making photos. Now.
I get it.
But yeah, Instagram, I'm with you. Because you're an influencer.
Oh yeah. Did I intentionally influence you there to get Instagram?
Yes.
Okay, so when it comes to composing or planning a shot, which I so often need to do because when I go away, I've got limited number of sunrises and sunsets in a specific location. I need to maximize it. I need to know what's going to happen, when, how, and where. The app that helps me do that is PhotoPills. And I am well aware that everyone's favorite photography app is PhotoPills. So I want to say something else, but it's PhotoPills. Yeah, it helps so much with planning sunrise, sunsets, golden hours, twilights. It's a really helpful app.
It's everything. And by the way, not a free app, but well worth every penny of it. So
no, I can't remember how much it is. I think it's like maybe £10 tops, $10 tops.
Yeah, which to some people is expensive, but keep in mind
for what it does is it's bargain.
We used to pay a lot for apps. Everybody thinks app store prices now, but in the day, that was crazy cheap. So let's get into the shot. Now, this shot we're going to talk about today, I mentioned it's the Aurora and the nighttime sky. And one of the things that made me want to talk about this image, and there's a ton of things that made me want to talk about this image, but one of the things is the way that it has three subjects, main subjects, not just like foreground, midground, background. There are three primary subjects in one shot. The waterfall is clearly, easily a main subject. The Aurora is clearly, easily a main subject. The night sky is clearly, again, a main subject. So for this shot, first of all, where is this?
So it's a waterfall called Kirkjafellsfoss in Iceland.
Bless you.
On the You're. I was going to say you're welcome. I don't know. That's not right. Yeah, Kirkjufellsfoss. It's on the western peninsula of Iceland, the bit that sticks out to the west, and it's it's Kirkjufellsfoss. So let's throw down some Icelandic here. So Kirkjufell, Kirk is church. Fell is like a hill, a small mountain, and a foss is a waterfall. So that is the small hill of the church waterfall. Because if you turn around from that spot that I'm standing in, it's I don't know if you watch Game of Thrones, but there's I don't, but there's apparently the mountain that's shaped like an arrowhead. Well, that's right there. That's Kirkjufell. The mountain is called Kirkjufell, and that's the waterfall associated to it.
So if you're facing the waterfall, directly behind you is the Arrowhead Mountain.
Just turn around, it's right there.
Okay. So for those on an audio feed, because about half the people watch the video and about half the people watch the audio, and based on the concept of the show, audio is a little more difficult because you kind of need to know what this image looks like. You can go see this image at behindtheshot.tv, but I'm going to try and describe it to you. It is a slow shutter. I don't even want to say long exposure, but it's a slow shutter waterfall shot. You've got a little bit of foreground land. You've got water. You've got a long exposure waterfall with the nice soft blended water, but yet there's a slight hint of, lighting across the front of the mountain. So you can see detail in the mountain, in the water, and in the hills. Right behind that is this gorgeous aurora. I've seen aurora shots actually I don't like because I don't think that the pattern, for lack of a better phrase, of the aurora fit the composition of the shot. But the way this is almost radiating out from right over the main waterfall, and then above that, you've got night sky. 3 of them all in one and colorful beyond belief. So this was shot with a Z6 in the 14-24.
Yeah.
What was the exposure on this?
I want to say it's about 20 seconds.
Okay. And this would have been, actually, you know what? I've got EXIF data. 14 millimeters, ISO 9000.
Yeah. So that's the beautiful thing about this cool sensor on this Nikon Z6. It's really good at dealing with high ISO and not creating any noise, or there's barely a bad pixel in it in terms of noise. I'm not talking about artistically, but in terms of noise,
9,000.
It's clean. Yeah. I loved it.
So tell me a little bit about this. How did you get this? Explain this shot to me.
Okay. So I was on 5-day trip to Iceland, and that was the night before the morning I flew home. And of the 5 days I was in Iceland on this trip, there was a geomagnetic storm for 4 of them. One of them, the entire country was covered in a blanket of thick cloud. I maximized on the other 3 nights to get as many images as I could of the Northern Lights because I love seeing them. It's this weird thing. If you've never seen the Northern Lights, you need to see it to understand. But it sort of captivates your body and kind of leaves you numb for a second when you see what nature can do in the sky above you. And I love that feeling, and that's why I keep going. That's why I'm going to Norway and Finland in a couple of days to get it again. So anyway, let me
interrupt you on that for a second, because you just said something interesting. The first Aurora shot that I had with Ken Skloot, which was episode number 3, he could not see it with his eye.
Okay.
But you could see this with your eye?
Yeah. Sometimes you can't see it with your eye and the camera can pick it up. Sometimes you get green, sometimes you get blue, red, purple. It all depends on the gases that are that are involved in the reaction in the ionosphere, the upper atmosphere. And sometimes you don't get a color associated to it because it's just not powerful enough, and so you can see it, but it looks gray, like a cloud almost.
Interesting.
Sometimes it's really so faint that you can't see it with your eye unless you if you look at anything like the back of your camera or a phone screen, you're not going to see it because your eyes aren't going to adjust. So you need to get those screens off and let your eyes adjust to the darkness. But Yeah, it all depends on how strong it is, and how strong it is depends on the solar wind, and the solar wind depends on what's going on the sun. It's all because of the sun.
So
We can get
before we
into that if
finish
you
your
want.
story of capturing this,
Yeah.
it's a good time to hit that fact that you also said northern lights as opposed to
Yes.
southern lights. And in the first
Yes.
show that we recorded for this, you kind of gave, I think you did it in like 2 minutes or something like that. The quick version of what the
Mm-hmm.
aurora is. So
Yeah.
explain this to the people like me that have no clue what I'm even looking at technically.
Okay, you ready? Set the timer.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. So, on Earth, do I have anything round? Not particularly round. Right. On
Okay,
Earth.
I'm resetting the timer now. Okay, ready and go.
Heck yeah. So on Earth, we've got two poles, a North Pole and a South Pole, and there is a flow of energy, the magnetic field that arcs out from one to the other, and it pulls things in at the poles and pushes them away at the edges. So over on the sun isn't a massive land like our Earth is. The Earth's got a big, heavy, dense iron core, and that's what causes that magnetic field. And we've got this crust, and so everything's nice and stable. We know we've got tectonic plates. We know they move. We know the water moves, but it doesn't move enough to affect the magnetic field much. But that's another point. On the sun is a ball of gas. It's helium. And because it doesn't have that core like we have, the iron core, it doesn't have a magnetic field, but it does have electrical and magnetic energy, and therefore it doesn't have any poles, but it does have these energy fields. So rather than having a north and a south pole, two poles that oppose each other, it's got loads of different magnetic lines all over the surface of it, like loads and loads of them. So you'll have a positive to a negative to a positive to a negative there, and one there, and one there, and one there, and they're all over the surface, and they build up the energy as the sun reacts. And the sun is basically a big nuclear reactor that's constantly going off, and it's been going off for a long, 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 long time. As these reactions occur, and the helium is colliding and it's fissioning, basically, it's nuclear fission. The energy that's released and in the form of magnetic energy is creating arcs, and these arcs push away from the surface because they're resisting and pushing away from the positive to the negative, etc., etc., and it creates arcs, which creates underneath them sunspots, which are the dark areas on the sun. When you look at those pictures that NASA shows us, and you see these arcs, which are solar flares, and they push off into space, and when there's enough energy in there that it's all built up, it sort of pings like a rubber band and it flies off into space. And obviously the sun's here and we're here, and it could go that way or over that way, but sometimes it comes to us. When it comes to us, we've got masses and masses of helium plasma, and plasma is like halfway between a gas and a liquid. It's another state of matter. That plasma flies through space at ridiculous speeds, like thousands of miles per second, flies through space, and the energy that comes with it remains with it. It doesn't sort of dissipate. The energy stays with that plasma. It hits the Earth, and that's where this field comes in. So it comes in here, and it's repelled by that line on the side and goes around to the top and to the bottom, and it usually goes past. It gets deflected. And that bit that hangs out the back is called the magnetotail. That bit is important because the energy that builds up there, you've got gravity pulling that way, you've got it moving that way, and at some point there, it's going to sit suspended in space. Back to that. The stuff that's coming in north and south is flying into our ionosphere and smashing into the particles in our atmosphere. So you've got helium plasma hitting oxygen and hydrogen and nitrogen and everything else that's up there. When it does that, it creates a reaction, and that reaction to release its energy comes out in the form of light. And depending on the particle it hits, that depends on what color the aurora is.
Okay.
Oxygen is green. Hydrogen is red. When that magnetotail builds up enough energy, when we come back to that, it snaps again like the rubber band on the sun flare, the planet, on the surface of the sun, that magnetotail can snap back, and that plasma that's suspended behind us can come flying back to Earth, and that is usually a lot denser and a lot more powerful, and that can create a solar storm. That's what a solar storm is versus a solar wind. So that stuff that comes back at us from the magnetotail snapping, that's a geomagnetic storm, which is rated G1, G2, G3, G4, whereas the regular stuff is rated on the KP scale, which is a latitudinally based scale based on the previous 3 hours anywhere in the world, rated on the K index, K1 or KP1, KP2, KP3, etc., etc. When you get to KP5, that's when you start getting the G1 level geomagnetic storm. And the time?
5 minutes.
Oh, cool.
That's not bad.
So I think I sort of slowed down a little bit and got a bit more in there this time. But
that's good though, because
that's basically that's what the Northern Lights are. It's let's break it right the way back down. Plasma flies off from the sun, comes and hits particles in our atmosphere, causes a reaction. The reaction is light, and light is the Northern Lights.
And based on the element that's being utilized in that particular case, that's the color that you get. Yep. Okay, so
exactly.
Now that everybody knows what you're looking at, because we all understand the night sky, and most of us understand what a waterfall is. So now we understand the color in between. Yeah. Finish your story about how you got this.
Right. So that was the last night, and my flight from Keflavik back to London was something like 8 a.m. And so I drove from the northeast of Iceland, the northeast of the country, and I didn't book accommodation that night. I decided, no, it's going to be a cool solar storm. I'm going to drive through the night. I'm going to stop somewhere, take my pictures, and then just carry on driving through the night to the airport, which was, if I did it in a straight line, it would have been like 5.5 hours. So I broke it up by going to Kirkjufellsfoss. And I got there at about midnight, past. And for the previous hour and a half, I was watching, while driving through Western Iceland and the northwest of the country around the Hringvegur, the ring road, I was just watching the sky explode with light and color because of this geomagnetic storm. And my goal, as it had been on another trip, was to get there to that. That wasn't the shot I wanted. Was to get to that mountain and waterfall and shoot the Arrowhead together. Mountain. Yeah, Kirkjufell. But when I got there, I was, having driven all that time in the middle of the night, I was quite annoyed at what was going on because it was quite a popular spot. So it's quite if you look at Icelandic Northern Light shots or any Icelandic sort of tourist board shots, you're going to see that mountain, Kirkjufell.
Right.
And it's not a unique shot, but I wanted it. That was just me being selfish. I wanted that shot. I got it. So I have the shot of Kirkjufell and as the background with the Northern Lights behind, with the waterfall as the foreground. But to get to the spot to take that picture, you have to walk round the top of the waterfall, up a slope, towards the mountain, and between the mountain and the waterfall, there's a road. And so people park their cars there, and they walk up that slope towards where I was standing. And then around the top of the waterfall, in the darkness, with flashlights. And so they were lighting up light trails all the way along this path, all the way through my scene, and I was just getting annoyed at what was going on. And I was watching the sky, and I was trying to enjoy it, but I was getting irritated because of what was going on with all these flashlights everywhere. And I had thought about what else I could do. So I had the Northern Lights spiraling around the top of the mountain, and it looked really cool, but it wasn't unique. It wasn't going to stand out. It was a cool shot, but it was like standard. Other people have it. And I looked at every single camera. There were maybe 20 cameras there. Every single camera was facing that mountain from the top of the waterfall because that's where the path is, that's where the trail is, and that's what people want to see, just like I did. So what I did instead is I pulled out my, I had a Lytra Pro, and I had my camera on the tripod, and I pulled everything out so I could see where I was going, and I got right down at the bottom of that waterfall where it kinks off as it flows down the river. It kinks off, and there's just enough of a gap that you can get in there and be at the face of the waterfall. The Northern Lights were predominantly behind me, but the way they were flying across the sky put them right in that gap in the shot, above the waterfall, at the edge of that mountain, and sort of made a leading line right there, with the top of the mountain as another and the waterfall as another, bringing your attention in from almost every angle to there. So I thought that's pretty cool. And then Steve had a question.
Yeah, I'm thinking now that you just described that. Yeah. You're at the foot of the waterfall. You said, how far away from the waterfall are you here? Like if you were to walk straight to that waterfall, how far is that? 15
steps if I could walk on water.
Wow.
Really
See,
close.
And it's that 14 millimeter that makes it feel so much more wider. But one of the things I thought when I first saw this shot was, if you were a cinematographer, if you were a lighting director, something like that, and you were trying to, whiteboard this scene for Game of Thrones or whatever, right? A movie. You this is how you would put the Northern Lights in combination with the night sky, in combination with the waterfalls. For those of you that are listening, really do go look at this shot, because from a compositional point of view, when you do a landscape like this, obviously, generally you want to avoid, horizon lines dead center, and you want to avoid too much water if it's not part of the story, and too much sky if it's not part of the story. Here, because there's the three subjects, that's really touchy. How much you leave of each. And obviously, you're going to want more of the night sky to see the stars above. You're going to want to be able to leave the aurora in, but have the waterfall. But the waterfall makes no sense without the right amount of water to make it feel like there's somewhere the water's going. And your composition here is perfect amount of water. Many people, I think, would have gone too much sky and lost the power of the waterfall itself.
Yeah.
There's no blowing highlights here.
Somehow it's not going to work, is it?
No, it won't. Yeah. It really, honestly, even there's one like left side near the top, one brighter star. Everything in here is so well laid out. The waterfalls,
I might be wrong, but I think that one's a planet. My housemate's a bit of a geek. He's got a telescope downstairs, and I think that's Mars. I might be wrong, but I think that's Mars.
Which could make sense, but the waterfalls. So the main big waterfall is almost dead center, and then they trail off frame left, camera left to other ones. The right-hand side is just land, so that it's balanced. You have more of the greenish lights on the right.
Top left of the waterfall, do you see there's a second layer, a second waterfall behind up in the distance?
Yes.
Do you see that?
Yeah.
That's cool, huh?
There's so much here. The green lights on the right balance the mountain that doesn't have as much green light on the left.
Yeah.
But at this exposure, you could have easily blown out highlights on that water.
Oh yeah. So I've lit that. The human eye is sort of pre-programmed to look at the brightest thing, and that's where our eyes first fall. So I needed to weigh up how much light I put in versus how much light was already there caused by the aurora, and also how much the aurora was spilling onto that landscape, because obviously it's a source of light. The aurora is a source of light, and depending on how strong it is, depends how light the landscape is lit up, how much light is cast upon the landscape. And so I had to weigh that up, but also consider, well, if we're going to look at the brightest thing, the way we find the brightest thing with our eye is with looking at the contrast of the image. And so I need to use the contrast to put your eye where I want it to be. And all of that's happening in the dark, without being able to see much on my screen. So it relies on taking a shot, guessing, making adjustments, taking another shot. Am I in the right place yet? Have I got the right amount of light yet? And various tests and things like that. But then when it came to lighting up that waterfall, I needed to give it enough light that it was clearly a focus point, but not too much light that it blew out in the highlights or clipped in some way.
Which would have hurt the shot.
Exactly, but also enough consistent light for a long enough duration that it made it a long exposure and gave it that silky smooth flow. Which, if you're interested, was the lowest possible setting on that Lytra Pro that I could possibly get, with my hand, like holding it, my hand in front of it so that the light goes up into the air and sort of spills onto the waterfall through like the water and the moisture and the whatever's going on in the air around me, that just allowed the light to spill onto there, just to bathe it in such insanely gentle light that over that 20-second odd exposure gave it that long exposure look and illuminated it, but didn't pull focus from the sky.
But how did you calculate that exposure, though? I mean, adding light, how did you know what exposure to go at?
So it's trial and error. There's no maths to it. In my case, I mean, there is maths to it, but in my case, it's not. It's trial and error. I know that I can't go above about 25 seconds in most cases for those wide lenses because of star trails. I don't want to get
so the stars won't be dots; they'll be lines.
Indeed. And then I also know that I need to get a long enough exposure to absorb that light from the northern lights when it's not so bright. And if it's really bright, I can slow it down, or I can ramp the ISO if it's not very intense. I just know from practice and experience what to do with that. When it came to using the artificial light, put my own light into the scene, that's the bit that became tricky. And again, it's from trial and error that I know, well, it needs to be such a tiny amount of light to paint that scene that, like, even if I just give it a flash, it's just going to clip. It's going to be insane. It's just going to be white. So I needed to just give it that gentlest little bathing of light to get it to do what I wanted to do.
It's literally, it's the, you've got to see this picture, because it's not just the water that could have blown out, but the feather of light on the hillside itself is just so spot on. When you get this back on the computer and you got to process this, is there anything magic that you do for processing a shot like this?
Night skies and Milky Ways, you mean?
Yeah, just like this shot, for example.
Generally, I want to bring the shadows down a tiny bit and bring the highlights up a tiny bit to give it some emphasis, or go into the curves and create an S curve. So you bring, which way am I on your screen? The top end, you bring the third quarter up, and the bottom end, you bring the first quarter down a bit, and then you can pull in the white and black points to give it the black and the white that you want with the contrast that you want. And it's that contrast that helps the night sky really pop, in particular the northern lights and the Milky Way.
What about like saturation vibrance?
I've often been criticized for my use of over vibrant images. I don't really do anything to the saturation slider. I will move into the targeted adjustments, the hue, saturation, luminance, and target the specific colors I want. When it comes to the northern lights, you can, if you've got some red and some purple in there, but with predominantly green, you can target that red and that purple to make them pop and make them stand out by simply sliding up the brightness and or the saturation of those specific colors. But when it comes to the northern lights overall, the more you get right in camera, the easier it'll be, because the more you mess with it, you've got less margin of error than you would have for like a daytime scene. So yeah, it's a tricky one, but it's the generic answer, which is right in most cases, is give it an S curve. It'll make it pop. Give it some contrast.
So curves, jump into curves. Yeah. And I see, for me, your shots have contrast in two ways. They do have contrast on a luminance level, 0 to 255, but they have contrast on a color level. And I've explained to people before that I'm colorblind. I mean, that doesn't mean I don't see color. It means I see color different than other people in some areas, reds and greens, for example. And I think, I mean, I don't know for sure, but I think I compensate for that by going for contrast in a picture. Well, you bring contrast in color as well as contrast in luminance. And that's what I think makes your pictures inviting.
That's what's going on with the HSL tabs and sliders. It's giving that contrast in the color rather than just using the contrast in the scene and using the contrast slider. I'm not really a fan of the contrast slider and what it does itself. You need to think about what kind of a contrast you're going for and do it specifically, deliberately to your image.
Instead of global, do more focused stuff. Yeah. If you were to give one tip for either Aurora, night sky, somebody that goes out and tries to shoot night sky or Aurora, what's the one tip that you would give them to help them get started?
If you're going to go shoot the Aurora, I'll fall back to what I said earlier, and it's a captivating, magical, natural phenomenon, and you need to enjoy it because people spend their lives with the Northern Lights on their bucket list, wanting and wishing to see it. And they might travel to, I don't know, Iceland, Norway, and not get the right weather and not have the confidence to go and find the right weather and therefore not see it. And so it remains on their bucket list. So if you see the Northern Lights, enjoy the experience. It's fantastic. In terms of photographing it, think of it. Okay, so the Northern Lights, generally, not always, sometimes they're pretty static, but generally they're moving. They're moving wildly across the sky. They're changing position. You've got a stream coming in over here, and then suddenly it jumps over here, or then it spills out and shrinks in, and there's movement. There's quite a lot of movement sometimes going on. And when you're shooting a night sky, you're using a long exposure or a longer exposure than normal to bring in that light through the barrel of the lens to hit the sensor to make sure you get your decent image. You can think of the Northern Lights as a waterfall when it comes to the settings you're using. Because they're moving and because it's a long exposure, if you want to capture the movement of the Northern Lights and go for a longer exposure, play off your exposure triad against your shutter speed to really get that milky, silky, smooth movement. Or if you want to freeze it, much like you do when you want to freeze the water that's falling and cascading over a waterfall, if you make it a faster shutter speed so that you get those like the gaps in between the lights and whatever else is going on up there in the sky, much like you would with a waterfall. So if you think of it as a waterfall and slow it down and speed it up to play with what's happening with the movement that's in the sky above your head, that's probably the best tip to give creative images rather than just sort of evidence images. Or like, right. I saw the Northern Lights, here's a picture to prove it.
Here's a snapshot, yeah.
Think outside the box and get something creative to make people go, wow, that's cool.
So as we've been talking, I've been putting up your lower thirds with your website and your social media links in it. But I want to make sure before we close out that first of all, I say thank you very much because, again, we did this twice and I appreciate your patience on that. But your work—
it's been great.
Your work is just so beautiful. You process images in a way that I just that really attach, that I can attach to, and I dig that. Dave Williams.
Thank you.
Everywhere, right?
Yeah. Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, idavewilliams.com. If you look for iDave Williams, you'll find me.
Makes it easier. So follow him on social media. Check out his website. Check out his tutorials on Tip Squirrel. And check him out also. Again, if you're a Kelby One member, go check him out on the Kelby One classes. Check him out next Photoshop World that he's at. And Dave Williams, thank you so much, my friend.
Thank you so much. You've said such kind things. It's really nice.
I say what
I hit the goal and I made you want to be there, so it worked.
And that's really it, isn't it? I mean, it's what I want to do with concert shots. I want to make people go, oh, I wish I'd seen that, or I feel like I have. Yeah. Perfect. So Dave Williams, idavewilliams.com, idavewilliams on every social media. Thank you so much, man. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right. So there's Dave Williams, Photoshop World, Kelby One, idavewilliams.com. Check him out everywhere that you can. Before we close out, a couple of things to let you know about. First of all, just a reminder, if you are not a Flickr member, go sign up at Flickr. You can do a free account. You can do a pro account. It does not matter. And then join our group. Behind the Shot is the name of the group. Once you join the Behind the Shot group, you can then submit images to that group. And we're just having fun seeing a lot of great work, but we've got something else in there as well. If you tag it with BTS Critique, Don Komarechka of Photo Geek Weekly podcast, well-known macro photographer, genius, actually, I would argue, macro photographer, and I are doing, and I don't know why I'm in this mix, but we're doing these critique shows, and they are on the Behind the Shot YouTube channel. We've done one at the time of this recording. By the time this episode airs, there'll probably be 2 of them up there on YouTube. And again, if you want to participate, if you want your image critiqued, tag it with BTS Critique, put it in that group over on Flickr, and we'll get to it. And other than that, to everybody, thank you as always for watching. Lately, I've gotten some great comments on iTunes, and to those of you that have taken the time to do a star rating, to do a comment, I can't say thank you enough. It helps with discoverability, and I really, really do appreciate it. For that matter, those of you that just reach out to me on social media and make comments or give feedback, I really, really do appreciate it. This is Behind the Shot, the show where we try and get inside the mind of great photographers. I'm Steve Brazill, and we'll see you on the next show.